The emergency responders at Jefferson High School had dealt with everything from bomb threats to natural disasters over the years, but they'd never seen anything quite like Rebecca Martinez walking through the police perimeter on that gray October morning. At first glance, she looked like a concerned parent who had somehow slipped past the security barriers by mistake. Her calloused hands gripped a weathered duffel bag that seemed too heavy for her petite frame, and her graying auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail that had probably looked the same for the past 20 years. She wore faded blue jeans, a plain black sweater with small holes near the elbows, and hiking boots that had clearly seen thousands of miles of rough terrain. Rebecca looked more like someone heading to a weekend camping trip than someone approaching one of the most dangerous hostage situations the city had ever faced. What caught everyone's attention wasn't just her appearance, though it was certainly unexpected given the heavily armed tactical team surrounding the school. It was the way she moved with a quiet purposefulness that seemed completely at odds with how out of place she looked. While SWAT officers rushed around in full tactical gear worth tens of thousands of dollars, coordinating with FBI negotiators and discussing the latest hostage rescue technology, Rebecca simply found an empty spot behind one of the command vehicles and began unpacking her equipment with methodical precision that suggested deep familiarity with crisis situations. Weapons she revealed from that battered canvas bag drew stares and poorly concealed disbelief from across the police staging area. It was a Remington Model 700, a bolt-action rifle that had been cutting-edge technology during the Vietnam War, but now looked like something that belonged in a hunting lodge rather than a modern tactical operation. The wooden stock was scratched and worn smooth in places where countless hands had gripped it, and the metal showed the kind of patina that only came from decades of careful use and maintenance. Compared to the sleek modern precision rifles carried by the police snipers surrounding it, Rebecca's weapon looked like a horse-drawn carriage parked next to a fleet of Formula One race cars. Detective Lieutenant Marcus Chen, a 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police Force with extensive SWAT training, was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. He approached the incident commander and nodded toward Rebecca's position with barely concealed irritation. "What is that civilian doing inside our perimeter? And what is she doing with that hunting rifle? This is a code-red hostage situation, not a deer hunting expedition." His voice carried across the staging area louder than he probably intended, drawing attention from other officers who were already struggling to maintain operational security. In an increasingly chaotic environment, Rebecca's expression didn't change as she continued her meticulous inspection of the rifle, running her fingers along the barrel and checking the action with movements that spoke of countless repetitions. Over many years, she seemed completely oblivious to the attention she was drawing, focused entirely on her equipment with the kind of concentration that suggested this ritual was as natural as breathing. The scope she mounted was a simple fixed-power Leupold that looked like it had been purchased sometime during the Carter administration, showing the kind of wear that came from field use rather than range practice. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest content. Your support means the world to us. Captain Sarah Walsh, the incident commander who had been dealing with the crisis for the past 4 hours, felt a mixture of frustration and confusion watching the older woman. She'd coordinated dozens of high-stakes operations over her career, and seeing someone who appeared so unprepared inserting themselves into her carefully orchestrated response made her deeply uncomfortable. The situation was already complex enough without having to worry about untrained civilians creating additional complications. "Someone needs to remove that woman from the tactical area immediately," Walsh said to her operations sergeant. "This is a multi-jurisdictional response with federal oversight. We can't have random people wandering around with hunting rifles while we're trying to coordinate precision operations." The buzz of radio chatter around the command post grew more intense as additional officers noticed Rebecca and her antique rifle, creating another layer of distraction in an already overwhelming situation. Inside Jefferson High School, the situation had reached a critical breaking point. 3 armed individuals had taken over the main building during the morning assembly, trapping nearly 400 students and faculty members in the gymnasium and cafeteria. The perpetrators had made increasingly erratic demands over the past several hours, and negotiators were reporting signs of deteriorating mental stability that suggested the situation could escalate to violence at any moment. The school building itself presented enormous tactical challenges for any potential rescue operation. Built in the 1960s with thick concrete walls and limited sightlines, it offered few opportunities for tactical teams to approach undetected or for snipers to establish effective overwatch positions. The main entrances were heavily fortified, and the few windows that provided visual access to the interior were positioned at angles that made precision shooting nearly impossible with conventional approaches. FBI Special Agent David Torres had been brought in specifically for his expertise in hostage negotiation and tactical operations. But even his extensive experience was being tested by the unique challenges Jefferson High presented. The building's architecture seemed designed to frustrate law enforcement response, with internal corridors that created perfect defensive positions for anyone determined to hold territory. Standard tactical doctrines that had proven effective in other situations seemed inadequate for the specific geometric and logistical problems this incident presented. Rebecca's presence in the staging area violated every protocol that governed multi-agency tactical operations. The carefully established perimeter was designed to maintain operational security, control information flow, and ensure that only properly authorized and equipped personnel had access to sensitive intelligence about the ongoing situation. Having an unknown civilian with questionable equipment inside that perimeter represented a potential security breach that could compromise the entire operation. The tactical teams positioned around Jefferson High represented the absolute pinnacle of modern law enforcement capability. Their equipment included thermal imaging systems that could detect human body heat through concrete walls, communication networks that allowed instant coordination between teams positioned miles apart, and weapons systems capable of delivering precise fire at distances that would have been considered impossible just a generation earlier. The officers carrying this equipment had trained for thousands of hours in scenarios specifically designed to prepare them for exactly this type of crisis. Lieutenant Chun's tactical gear alone represented more than $50,000 in research, development, and manufacturing precision. His rifle featured a barrel that had been precision crafted by master gunsmiths, an action that had been blueprinted to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, and optics that incorporated night vision, thermal imaging, and laser rangefinding. Capabilities that could calculate precise shooting solutions faster than most people could perform basic mathematics. The ammunition he carried was manufactured to specifications that ensured consistent performance across varying environmental conditions. Captain Walsh's command vehicle contained communication and surveillance equipment that provided real-time intelligence about conditions inside the school building. Satellite feeds, drone surveillance, and electronic monitoring systems gave her access to information that would have seemed like science fiction to law enforcement officers just 20 years earlier. Her team could monitor cell phone communications, track movement through thermal signatures, and coordinate response efforts across multiple agencies with scientific precision. The FBI's Tactical Response Unit brought even more sophisticated capabilities to the operation. Their equipment included breaching charges designed by military engineers, ballistic shields capable of stopping rifle rounds, and assault vehicles that could approach fortified positions while providing mobile cover for rescue teams. Agent Torres had access to psychological profiles of the perpetrators, architectural plans of the building, and tactical intelligence that had been gathered through sources and methods that remained classified. Rebecca's simple rifle and worn equipment seemed almost primitive compared to the technological sophistication surrounding her. While other responders relied on electronic systems that could process hundreds of variables simultaneously, she appeared content to make handwritten notes in a small notebook, occasionally consulting what looked like a hand-drawn map of the area. Her preparation methods seemed to belong to a different era entirely, one where technology couldn't compensate for fundamental skills and experience. The contrast between Rebecca's approach and the high-tech solutions being employed by official responders created a visual metaphor that was hard to ignore. Everything about modern tactical operations emphasized technological advantages, scientific approaches to problem-solving, and equipment capabilities that could provide decisive margins in life-or-death situations. Rebecca's presence suggested either profound ignorance of contemporary methods or a confidence in older approaches that bordered on reckless disregard for the stakes involved. Detective Chun found himself increasingly irritated by Rebecca's calm persistence in the face of obvious disapproval from trained professionals. Her refusal to acknowledge that she was out of place in an elite tactical environment seemed to mock the serious nature of the crisis they were attempting to resolve. Lives hung in the balance, careers and reputations were at stake, and having someone who appeared so obviously unprepared inserting themselves into the situation felt like a dangerous distraction. The morning sun climbed higher over Jefferson High, casting long shadows across the school grounds that would soon become a critical factor in any tactical operation. The building's orientation created specific challenges for surveillance and approach routes, while the surrounding residential neighborhood meant that any use of force would have to account for civilian safety considerations that extended far beyond the immediate crisis zone. Weather conditions added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. A steady wind from the northwest was creating atmospheric conditions that would affect the accuracy of any long-range shooting, while temperature variations between the shaded staging areas and sun-exposed positions around the school were creating thermal gradients that could interfere with precision optics and ballistic calculations. Inside the command vehicle, intelligence reports painted an increasingly grim picture of conditions within the school building. The perpetrators were showing signs of paranoia and aggression that suggested they might be preparing to harm hostages if their demands weren't met soon. Negotiators were reporting difficulty maintaining productive dialogue, and psychological profiles indicated that the situation was approaching a critical decision point where action might become necessary to prevent mass casualties. Rebecca's methodical preparation continued despite the growing chaos around her. She consulted her handwritten notes with the same calm focus she'd maintained since arriving, making occasional adjustments to her rifle scope with tools that looked like they'd been crafted decades ago. Her ammunition box contained cartridges that appeared to be hand-loaded rather than factory-manufactured, suggesting a level of customization and attention to detail that contradicted the amateur appearance her equipment projected. The tactical briefing scheduled for noon would determine the next phase of the response operation. Captain Walsh needed to present options to federal authorities who were growing increasingly impatient with the lack of progress in resolving the crisis. The longer the situation continued, the greater the risk that it would end in tragedy, and the pressure to take decisive action was mounting from sources that extended all the way to Washington. Rebecca's presence represented an unknown variable that could complicate any tactical plan that might be developed. Her unauthorized access to the staging area raised security concerns, while her outdated equipment suggested capabilities that might not be adequate for the precision required in a hostage rescue operation. The responsible course of action would be to remove her from the area before she could create additional problems or interfere with properly authorized personnel. As the morning progressed toward what everyone recognized would be a critical decision point, Rebecca Martinez continued her quiet preparation with the same methodical focus that had characterized her arrival. The woman who looked so out of place among the technological sophistication of modern tactical response was about to become a central figure in events that would test every assumption about capability, preparation, and the difference between appearance and reality. The Jefferson High School crisis response represented the convergence of the most advanced tactical capabilities in American law enforcement. The staging area had been transformed into a high-tech command center that showcased decades of evolution in crisis management technology and methodology. Mobile command units lined the perimeter like a small city of emergency response capability, each vehicle containing millions of dollars worth of surveillance equipment, communication systems, and tactical coordination tools that could orchestrate complex operations across multiple agencies and jurisdictions. The Metropolitan Police Department SWAT team embodied 15 years of post-9/11's tactical development. Their training regimen included monthly exercises at facilities designed to replicate every conceivable urban warfare scenario, from school shootings to terrorist attacks. Each team member had completed specialized courses in close-quarters combat, precision marksmanship, explosive breaching, and hostage psychology that represented thousands of hours of instruction from the nation's premier tactical schools. Their selection process eliminated 90% of candidates, choosing only those individuals who demonstrated exceptional physical conditioning, mental resilience, and the ability to perform complex tasks under extreme stress. The weapon systems deployed around Jefferson High cost more than most people earned in a year. Each sniper rifle represented the culmination of aerospace engineering principles applied to small arms design, featuring barrels manufactured to tolerances typically reserved for spacecraft components and actions machined to specifications that eliminated mechanical variation down to microscopic levels. The optics mounted on these weapons incorporated night vision technology originally developed for military satellites, thermal imaging systems borrowed from missile guidance programs, and laser range-finding capabilities that could calculate precise ballistic solutions while accounting for atmospheric pressure, humidity, temperature gradients, and wind velocity variations. FBI Special Agent Torres commanded resources that reflected the federal government's commitment to preventing another Columbine or Sandy Hook tragedy. His tactical response unit included specialists trained at Quantico facilities that remained classified, using equipment and methodologies developed through partnerships with military special operations communities. The psychological profiles his team maintained were created by behavioral analysts who had studied every major hostage situation in American history, identifying patterns and indicators that could predict perpetrator behavior with scientific accuracy. The communication networks linking all response agencies operated on encrypted frequencies that prevented unauthorized monitoring while enabling instant coordination between teams positioned throughout the city. Real-time intelligence flowed through these systems from sources that included satellite surveillance, cell phone monitoring, and drone reconnaissance that provided continuous updates about conditions inside the school building. Command centers in Washington were monitoring the situation directly, ready to authorize additional resources or intervention if local capabilities proved insufficient. Captain Walsh's operational authority extended across jurisdictional boundaries that normally complicated multi-agency responses. Her authority had been established through mutual aid agreements, negotiated after previous incidents revealed coordination problems that had cost lives. She commanded tactical teams from 3 different police departments, federal agents from multiple agencies, and specialized units that existed specifically to handle crisis situations that exceeded normal law enforcement capabilities. Her decisions would be reviewed by oversight boards, federal investigators, and congressional committees that monitored law enforcement response to Domestic terrorism incidents. The tactical doctrine governing the Jefferson High response had been developed through analysis of hundreds of similar incidents worldwide. Computer models had been created to simulate various scenarios, testing different approaches and identifying optimal strategies for maximizing hostage survival while minimizing risk to responding officers. These models incorporated lessons learned from incidents in Moscow, Mumbai, and dozens of American schools where tactical responses had succeeded or failed, based on factors that could now be quantified and predicted. The staging area itself represented a marvel of logistical coordination that could deploy overwhelming force within minutes of receiving authorization. Armored vehicles positioned around the school perimeter could breach reinforced doors and walls while providing mobile cover for assault teams. Helicopter support waited at nearby facilities, ready to provide aerial surveillance, medical evacuation, or tactical insertion capabilities that could change the operational dynamic instantly. Medical teams stood by with trauma capabilities that could treat multiple gunshot wounds simultaneously, using techniques and equipment developed in military combat hospitals. Intelligence gathering capabilities deployed for the Jefferson High incident exceeded those available to most foreign governments. Electronic surveillance systems could monitor communications inside the building, track movement through thermal signatures, and provide real-time assessment of perpetrator locations and hostage conditions. Behavioral analysts were creating psychological profiles of the gunman based on their demands, communication patterns, and response to negotiation attempts, providing tactical teams with predictive intelligence about likely actions and reactions. Weapons carried by tactical team members represented the absolute cutting edge of small arms technology. Modular rifle systems could be reconfigured during operations to meet changing mission requirements, while ammunition designed by ballistics engineers maintained lethal effectiveness at ranges that would have been impossible for previous generations of law enforcement officers. Body armor incorporated materials developed from military applications, providing protection against threats that ranged from handgun rounds to rifle caliber, armor-piercing ammunition, training protocols that prepared officers for situations like Jefferson High reflected decades of research into human performance under extreme stress. Simulation exercises replicated the psychological pressure of life or death decision-making, while physical conditioning programs ensured that tactical responses could be maintained during operations that might extend for hours or days. Mental preparation included exposure to scenarios specifically designed to test judgment, accuracy, and ethical decision-making when civilian lives hung in the balance. The stakes at Jefferson High extended far beyond the immediate crisis. Federal authorities understood that the response to this incident would establish precedents for handling similar situations nationwide. Media coverage was being monitored by terrorist organizations worldwide, who would analyze tactical methods and identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future attacks. The success or failure of the response would influence funding decisions, training protocols, and equipment procurement for law enforcement agencies across the country. Operational security measures surrounding the response reflected the understanding that information about tactical capabilities could be used by future perpetrators to defeat law enforcement responses. Communication protocols prevented unauthorized personnel from accessing sensitive intelligence, while equipment specifications remained classified to prevent criminals from developing countermeasures. Even the presence of certain specialized units was kept confidential to maintain tactical advantages that had been developed through years of research and operational experience. The command structure established for the Jefferson High response incorporated lessons learned from previous incidents, where unclear authority had resulted in tactical confusion and unnecessary casualties. Chain of command protocols ensured that critical decisions could be made rapidly, while maintaining accountability for actions taken under extreme pressure. Legal advisors were present to provide real-time guidance about the use of force, ensuring that tactical responses remained within constitutional boundaries even when lives were at immediate risk. Rebecca Martinez's presence in this environment of technological sophistication and tactical precision created a jarring contrast that violated every assumption about capability and preparation. Her simple equipment and casual demeanor seemed to mock the intense professionalism that defined modern crisis response, suggesting either dangerous ignorance of the stakes involved or a confidence in alternative approaches that bordered on reckless disregard for established procedures and proven methodologies. Detective Lieutenant Chun's patience finally snapped when he observed Rebecca attempting to establish a shooting position behind the medical response vehicle. Her casual disregard for established perimeter protocols and tactical zones represented exactly the kind of civilian interference that could turn a controlled operation into a catastrophic failure. He approached her position with the stern expression of a 20-year veteran who had dealt with countless well-meaning but dangerous amateurs who thought they understood police work better than trained professionals. "Ma'am, I need you to gather your belongings and move outside the tactical perimeter immediately," Chun said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "This is a restricted area for authorized personnel only, and carrying weapons inside a federal operation zone is a serious criminal offense." He gestured toward the outer perimeter where other civilians were being held at a safe distance, his tone suggesting that further discussion would not be welcome. Rebecca looked up from her rifle, where she had been making minute adjustments to the scope with a small screwdriver that appeared to have been modified for precision work. Her expression remained calm and attentive, showing no signs of the intimidation that Chun's authoritative manner usually produced in civilians who overestimated their importance in police operations. "I understand your concerns, Detective," she replied quietly, returning her attention to her equipment. "I'll try to stay out of everyone's way." The response infuriated Chun even more than outright defiance would have. Rebecca's polite acknowledgement of his authority, combined with her complete failure to comply with his direct order, suggested either dangerous stupidity or arrogant disregard for procedures that existed to prevent exactly the kind of chaos her presence was creating. "This isn't a request, ma'am. This is a lawful order from a police officer. You need to move now, or I'll have you arrested for interfering with a federal investigation." Captain Walsh had been monitoring the exchange through her radio headset while coordinating with FBI tactical commanders about potential assault scenarios. The distraction of dealing with unauthorized personnel was exactly what she didn't need when every minute of delay increased the risk that negotiations would fail and tactical intervention would become necessary. She approached Rebecca's position with the expression of someone whose patience had been tested beyond reasonable limits. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Walsh, the incident commander for this operation," she announced formally. "I need to see your identification and authorization for being inside this perimeter with that weapon." Her tone carried the weight of ultimate authority in the operational area, backed by federal statutes that made interference with crisis response a felony punishable by years in federal prison. Rebecca reached into her jacket pocket and produced a worn leather wallet, extracting what appeared to be a standard driver's license along with several other cards that she handed to Walsh without comment. The identification showed Rebecca Martinez, age 52, with an address in the suburbs that was known for middle-class families and retirees. Nothing about the documentation suggested any connection to law enforcement, military service, or tactical operations. "Mrs. Martinez, this identification doesn't show any authorization for your presence in a restricted tactical zone," Walsh said after examining the documents carefully. "What agency or organization do you represent? And who authorized your access to this operation?" Her questions were designed to expose the obvious fiction that Rebecca had any legitimate reason for being inside the perimeter with a rifle. The crowd of Officers who had gathered to witness Rebecca's inevitable removal grew larger as word spread about the civilian who was refusing to follow direct orders from senior commanders. FBI agent Torres approached the group with the expression of someone whose federal authority trumped any local considerations about diplomatic handling of stubborn civilians. His presence usually ended discussions about jurisdiction and compliance immediately. "This is a federal operation under the authority of the Department of Justice," Torres announced, his voice carrying the weight of prosecutorial power that could destroy lives. "Any unauthorized personnel remaining in the tactical zone after being ordered to leave will be arrested and charged with federal crimes. There are no exceptions, and there will be no additional warnings." Rebecca's response to this escalating pressure surprised everyone present. Instead of showing the fear or compliance that such threats usually produced, she seemed genuinely interested in understanding their perspective. "I appreciate the difficult position you're all in," she said thoughtfully. "Command and control is essential in situations like this, and unauthorized personnel can certainly create complications." Sergeant Mike Reeves, a 15-year SWAT veteran, couldn't contain his frustration with Rebecca's apparent inability to grasp the seriousness of the situation. "Lady, there are 400 kids trapped in that building with armed psychopaths who are threatening to start killing people if their demands aren't met. This isn't a neighborhood watch meeting. This is life and death, and you're playing games with equipment that belongs in a hunting museum." The comment drew approving nods from nearby officers who shared Reeves' assessment that Rebecca's presence was becoming an insult to the professionalism and urgency that the crisis demanded. Her ancient rifle and casual demeanor seemed to mock the sophisticated preparation and tactical expertise that everyone else had brought to bear on the situation. Detective Chun decided to address the situation more directly. "Ma'am, that rifle you're carrying couldn't hit the broadside of a barn at the distances we're dealing with here. The school building is over 800 yards from any viable shooting position, and the wind conditions today would make precision shooting nearly impossible even with proper equipment. You're going to get people killed if you try to play sniper with that antique." FBI Tactical Specialist Agent Maria Santos approached the group after monitoring the conversation from the command vehicle. Her specialized training in hostage rescue operations had taught her to identify and eliminate variables that could compromise mission success, and Rebecca's unauthorized presence represented exactly the kind of unpredictable element that could turn a surgical operation into a bloodbath. "The tactical parameters for this operation have been calculated based on known variables and established capabilities," Santos explained with the patience of someone educating a dangerous amateur. "Wind speed, atmospheric conditions, building layout, and target distances all require precision equipment and specialized training to engage successfully. That hunting rifle simply doesn't have the mechanical accuracy or ballistic characteristics necessary for the kind of precision this situation demands." Rebecca listened to these assessments with genuine interest, occasionally nodding as if she found their technical explanations informative rather than insulting. Her apparent fascination with their expertise seemed to encourage further criticism of her equipment and capabilities. "These officers are absolutely right about the technical challenges," she agreed. 800 yards in variable wind conditions with multiple hostages in proximity to targets would be extremely difficult even under ideal circumstances. The acknowledgement of the obvious technical problems didn't satisfy her critics, who were beginning to view Rebecca's persistence as evidence of dangerous delusion about her own capabilities. Captain Walsh had dealt with enough wannabe heroes over her career to recognize the signs of civilian fantasy about tactical operations, and Rebecca's behavior fit the pattern perfectly. "Mrs. Martinez, even if you had authorization to be here, which you clearly don't, that equipment would be inadequate for any tactical role in this operation," Walsh said firmly. Modern police snipers train constantly with precision rifle systems that cost more than most people's cars. They use ballistic computers, advanced optics, and specialized ammunition that gives them capabilities your hunting rifle could never match. The growing chorus of criticism seemed to energize rather than discourage Rebecca, who continued making notes in her small notebook, while periodically consulting what appeared to be a hand-drawn sketch of the school building and surrounding area. Her methods looked like something an amateur might use for planning a weekend camping trip rather than analyzing a complex tactical situation with multiple variables and life-or-death consequences. Agent Torres made one final attempt to resolve the situation diplomatically before resorting to arrest, procedures that would create additional complications for an already complex operation. "Ma'am, I'm going to give you one last opportunity to leave this area voluntarily. If you refuse, I'll have you taken into federal custody, and your interference with this operation will result in charges that could send you to prison for years. There's no middle ground here." Rebecca's response would determine whether the situation escalated to physical confrontation, or whether she would finally acknowledge the reality that her presence was unwelcome and potentially dangerous. The assembled officers waited for her capitulation to superior authority and overwhelming evidence that she was completely out of her depth in an environment that demanded professional expertise and proper equipment. The radio crackle from the frackle from the negotiation team inside the command vehicle cut through the tension surrounding Rebecca's unauthorized presence like a knife through silence. Agent Torres pressed his earpiece closer, his face draining of color as he received the update that everyone had been dreading since the crisis began 4 hours earlier. The lead negotiator's voice carried the strain of someone who had exhausted every psychological technique in his arsenal without achieving meaningful progress. "Command, this is negotiation team leader. The primary subject is becoming increasingly agitated and has issued a 30-minute deadline for meeting his demands. He's claiming that if we don't provide the helicopter and clear passage he's requested, he'll begin executing hostages starting with the youngest students." The transmission sent shockwaves through every officer within hearing range, transforming what had been a tense but manageable situation into an immediate life-or-death crisis. "Captain." Walsh felt her stomach drop as the implications of the deadline became clear. 30 minutes wasn't enough time to organize a successful tactical assault through the building's maze of corridors and reinforced positions. The architectural challenges that had been complicating planning all morning had just become insurmountable. Obstacles that could result in mass casualties if conventional approaches were attempted. Her trained tactical responses suddenly seemed inadequate for the impossible timeline they were facing. FBI Agent Torres immediately activated emergency protocols that would bring additional federal resources to bear on the situation. But even helicopter transport of specialized teams would require more time than they had available. The tactical reality was that Jefferson High's design created perfect defensive positions for determined gunmen while offering virtually no approach routes that wouldn't expose rescue teams to devastating crossfire. Standard breach and clear operations that worked in other environments would be suicide missions in this building. Detective Chun found himself facing the professional nightmare that every law enforcement officer trained for but hoped never to experience. The situation had moved beyond negotiation and tactical planning into pure crisis response, where immediate action was required despite inadequate preparation and impossible odds. His 20 years of experience provided no roadmap for success when faced with architectural obstacles and time constraints that defeated every conventional solution. The command vehicle erupted into frantic activity as intelligence analysts, tactical planners, and federal coordinators attempted to develop options that didn't exist. Satellite imagery was re-examined for approach routes that had been overlooked. Building plans were scrutinized for structural weaknesses that might be exploited, and communication intercepts were analyzed for any indication that the deadline might be extended through continued negotiation efforts. Agent Santos began coordinating with tactical teams positioned around the building perimeter, but her assessment confirmed what everyone already suspected. There was no way to reach the hostages within 30 minutes without accepting casualty rates that violated every principle of tactical operations. The perpetrators had chosen their positions perfectly, creating killing fields that would decimate any assault force before they could reach the areas where students and faculty were being held. Rebecca Martinez had been listening to these developments with the same calm attention she'd maintained throughout the morning's confrontations. While officers around her descended into barely controlled panic about the impossible situation they were facing, she continued making notations in her small notebook and consulting her hand-drawn maps of the area. Her behavior seemed almost surreal given the crisis that was unfolding around them. "Ma'am, you need to clear this area immediately," Detective Chen said urgently, his previous irritation replaced by genuine concern for civilian safety. "This situation is about to become extremely dangerous, and we can't guarantee your security if tactical operations commence." His tone carried none of the authority he'd displayed earlier, replaced by the desperate professionalism of someone whose world was collapsing around him. Rebecca looked up from her calculations with an expression that seemed oddly thoughtful, given the chaos surrounding them. "Detective, I've been reviewing the tactical challenges you're facing, and I think there might be an alternative approach that hasn't been considered." Her voice remained calm and conversational, creating a stark contrast with the urgent radio traffic and shouted commands that filled the staging area. "Captain." Walsh turned toward Rebecca with the expression of someone whose patience had been stretched beyond all reasonable limits. "Mrs. Martinez, this is not the time for amateur suggestions. We have professional tactical teams with decades of experience trying to solve problems that may not have solutions. Unless you have specialized training that you haven't mentioned, your input is not helpful right now." The dismissal would normally have ended any civilian attempt to contribute to tactical planning, but Rebecca's response surprised everyone within hearing range. "Actually, Captain, I might have some relevant experience for this particular type of situation. The building layout and perpetrator positions create challenges that conventional urban assault tactics weren't designed to address, but there are alternative approaches that might prove effective." FBI Agent Torres found himself torn between the need to focus on legitimate tactical options and curiosity about what alternative approaches Rebecca thought she could contribute. His training in crisis management had taught him to consider every possible resource when facing impossible situations, but nothing in his experience suggested that middle-aged suburban women possessed tactical expertise that federal specialists lacked. "Mrs. Martinez, with all due respect, this is a highly complex tactical situation that requires specialized knowledge and equipment," Torres said carefully. "The perpetrators are positioned in areas that provide excellent fields of fire while limiting our approach options. The building's architecture creates natural choke points that would funnel any assault force into killing zones. Unless you have military or law enforcement background that gives you insight into solving these problems, I need you to let us focus on developing viable options." Rebecca's next statement created a moment of absolute silence in the staging area that seemed to suspend the crisis around them. "Agent Torres, I understand the tactical challenges you're describing because I've dealt with similar situations before. The building layout does create problems for conventional approaches, but there are shooting positions that could provide the angles necessary to neutralize the threats without exposing assault teams to defensive fire." The claim that a suburban woman with a hunting rifle could solve tactical problems that were defeating the combined expertise of federal agents, SWAT teams, and military-trained specialists struck everyone present as either delusional bravado or dangerous fantasy. Detective Chun found himself wondering if the stress of the situation had triggered some kind of psychological break that was causing Rebecca to believe she possessed capabilities that clearly didn't exist. Captain Walsh decided to address Rebecca's claims directly rather than allowing them to continue disrupting tactical planning efforts. Mrs. Martinez, these perpetrators are positioned in locations that provide them with commanding views of all approaches to the building. Our best snipers have been trying to identify viable shooting positions for hours without success. The angles simply don't exist for precision shots that could eliminate threats without endangering hostages. Rebecca stood up slowly and gestured toward the hillside that rose behind the residential neighborhood adjacent to Jefferson High School. The elevation change created sight lines that extended well beyond the immediate tactical area, reaching distances that conventional police operations rarely considered practical for precision shooting. Her suggestion that solutions might exist at such ranges seemed to confirm that she fundamentally misunderstood the limitations of small arms accuracy. The positions your teams have been evaluating are all within the immediate tactical perimeter, Rebecca said thoughtfully, but there are elevated positions approximately 850 yards from the building. That would provide direct line of sight to the areas where the perpetrators are positioned. The angles would allow precision engagement without risk to hostages or assault teams. The suggestion drew incredulous stares from every tactical professional within hearing range. 850 yards represented distances that challenged the capabilities of military snipers using precision rifle systems under ideal conditions. The idea that such shots could be attempted during a hostage crisis, with civilian lives hanging in the balance, using hunting rifle equipment, seemed like evidence of complete disconnection from reality. Agent Santos found herself responding with the kind of patient explanation typically reserved for educating civilians about the realities of tactical operations. Mrs. Martinez, precision shooting at distances exceeding 800 yards requires specialized equipment, extensive training, and ideal environmental conditions. The wind conditions today, combined with the pressure of a hostage situation, would make such shots virtually impossible even for our most experienced personnel using the best available equipment. Rebecca's response to this technical assessment would determine whether she finally acknowledged the limitations that everyone else could see clearly, or whether her apparent delusion about her own capabilities would continue to interfere with legitimate tactical planning efforts during the most critical phase of the crisis. Rebecca's response came not in words, but in action that would forever alter how everyone present understood the relationship between appearance and capability. She shouldered her weathered rifle with movements that seemed to flow like water, each motion precise and economical in ways that suggested thousands of repetitions under conditions far more demanding than a suburban crisis response. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The woman who had appeared uncertain and out of place suddenly radiated a quiet confidence that made seasoned tactical officers instinctively step back. Agent Torres, I'll need approximately 12 minutes to reach the position I identified, Rebecca said calmly, already beginning to move toward her equipment bag. The wind conditions are actually favorable for the shot angle I'm planning, and the atmospheric pressure is stable enough to allow for accurate ballistic calculations at the required distance. Her voice carried a technical precision that hadn't been present in her earlier conversational responses, suggesting knowledge of shooting fundamentals that contradicted everything about her amateur appearance. Captain Walsh found herself caught between the desperate need for any viable solution and the professional impossibility of authorizing an unknown civilian to attempt precision shooting during a federal crisis response. 23 minutes remained until the deadline, and conventional tactical options had been exhausted without producing any approach that wouldn't result in massive casualties. The cognitive dissonance of considering Rebecca's proposal felt like professional suicide, but the alternative was accepting failure that could cost hundreds of lives. Mrs. Martinez, even if you had the training to attempt such a shot, we can't authorize civilian involvement in tactical operations, Walsh said, her voice carrying the strain of someone whose authority was being tested by circumstances beyond her experience. The liability issues alone would end careers, and if you missed or miscalculated, the consequences could trigger exactly the massacre we're trying to prevent. FBI agent Torres activated his radio to coordinate with tactical teams positioned around the building perimeter, but the reports he received confirmed the hopeless nature of their situation. Every approach route had been analyzed and found wanting. Every potential shooting position had been evaluated and dismissed, and every technological solution had been applied without producing options that could succeed within the time constraints they faced. Rebecca's preparation routine drew the attention of everyone in the staging area as she assembled equipment with the kind of methodical precision that spoke of life-or-death familiarity with crisis situations. Her ammunition selection involved examining individual cartridges with a jeweler's loupe, checking for imperfections that might affect accuracy at extreme range. The brass cases were sorted by weight variations measured in grains, and the bullets themselves were inspected for dimensional consistency that suggested hand-loading techniques far beyond recreational shooting requirements. The scope adjustments she made to her rifle were calculated using handwritten tables that accounted for atmospheric conditions, elevation changes, and ballistic coefficients that most recreational shooters never encountered. Her methods appeared primitive compared to the electronic ballistic computers used by police snipers, but the mathematical principles underlying her calculations were sophisticated enough to suggest formal training in long-range shooting theory. Detective Chen watched Rebecca's preparations with growing fascination mixed with professional skepticism. The technical competence she displayed contradicted every assumption he'd made about her capabilities, but the stakes were too high to base tactical decisions on amateur demonstrations of equipment handling. "Ma'am, even if you could make that shot under ideal conditions, this isn't a training exercise. One mistake could trigger a response that gets everyone in that building killed." The radio crackle from the negotiation team provided a grim reminder of the time pressure they faced. "Command, the primary subject is becoming increasingly agitated. He's demanding confirmation that his helicopter is being prepared, and he's threatening to begin executing hostages in 20 minutes if he doesn't see evidence of compliance with his demands." Rebecca's response to this update was to check her watch and increase the pace of her preparation without showing any signs of the stress that was overwhelming everyone around her. Her breathing remained controlled and even. Her movements stayed precise and economical, and her attention remained focused on technical details that could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Agent Santos found herself facing a decision that violated every protocol she'd learned during her federal training. The conventional solutions had been exhausted. The timeline made traditional tactical approaches impossible, and the alternative was accepting responsibility for mass casualties that could have been prevented. Rebecca's obvious competence with her equipment suggested capabilities that hadn't been apparent during her earlier interactions with law enforcement personnel. "Mrs. Martinez, if we were to consider your proposal hypothetically, what specific assurances could you provide about the precision required for this type of engagement?" Santos asked carefully, her tone suggesting professional evaluation rather than authorization for civilian involvement in tactical operations. Rebecca's answer demonstrated understanding of ballistic principles that impressed even seasoned tactical specialists. "Agent Santos, at 850 yards with current atmospheric conditions, I'm calculating a bullet drop of approximately 97 inches, with wind drift compensation of 14 inches assuming steady northwest winds at 12 miles per hour. The target zone allows for a margin of error of approximately 6 inches while maintaining complete safety for hostages." The technical sophistication of her ballistic calculations caught the attention of every tactical professional within hearing range. Her numbers suggested familiarity with long-range shooting theory that extended far beyond recreational hunting, incorporating variables and compensation techniques that were typically taught only in military or specialized law enforcement programs. FBI. Tactical Sniper Sergeant James Rodriguez had been monitoring Rebecca's preparations while coordinating with his own team positioned around the building perimeter. His experience with precision shooting at extreme ranges told him that her calculations were mathematically sound, but the emotional and physical demands of shooting under crisis conditions created variables that no amount of technical knowledge could fully address. "The ballistics are theoretically correct," Rodriguez admitted reluctantly, "but shooting at live targets during a hostage crisis involves psychological pressures that can destroy accuracy even for experienced operators. The knowledge that missing could result in mass casualties creates stress responses that affect breathing, trigger control, and sight alignment in ways that training can't fully prepare you for." Rebecca acknowledged his assessment with the respect of someone who understood the psychological dimensions of precision shooting under pressure. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you're absolutely right about the stress factors involved in tactical shooting. The knowledge that lives depend on shot placement creates mental challenges that pure marksmanship training doesn't address." Her acknowledgement of the psychological complexities seemed to satisfy Rodriguez's concerns about amateur overconfidence, but it also raised new questions about what experience had taught her to understand such nuances. The technical knowledge she displayed suggested training that went far beyond civilian shooting sports, while her calm demeanor under pressure indicated familiarity with high-stakes situations that contradicted her suburban appearance. Hey everyone! Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest content. Your support means the world to us. The decision point had arrived with brutal clarity. 18 minutes remained until the deadline. Conventional tactical options had been exhausted, and Rebecca Martinez represented the only alternative to accepting catastrophic failure. Captain Walsh found herself facing the kind of command decision that would define the remainder of her career, regardless of the outcome. "Mrs. Martinez, against my better judgment and in direct violation of established protocols, I'm going to authorize you to attempt the approach you've described," Walsh said formally. "If you have any doubts about your ability to make this shot successfully, now is the time to acknowledge those limitations before lives are put at risk." Rebecca's response came in the form of fluid motion as she shouldered her rifle and began moving toward the elevated position she'd identified. Her movement through the residential neighborhood was economical and purposeful, suggesting familiarity with tactical displacement under time pressure. The woman who had appeared so out of place among modern tactical professionals was revealing capabilities that belonged to an entirely different category of expertise. The shot, when it came, would either validate everything she'd claimed about her capabilities or trigger the worst hostage crisis massacre in American history. Every officer in the staging area understood that they were witnessing either the most remarkable display of civilian heroism they would ever see, or the most catastrophic failure of judgment in modern law enforcement history. The radio transmission that reached Captain Walsh's command vehicle 30 seconds after Rebecca's shot came from the tactical observation team positioned on the school's opposite side. "Command, this is Overwatch 2. Confirm 3 subjects down, all hostiles neutralized with extreme precision. Hostages appear unharmed and are beginning to move toward exits." The impossible had just become reality, delivered by someone whose background remained completely unknown to the dozens of law enforcement professionals who had dismissed her capabilities. Agent Torres found himself staring at the residential hillside, where Rebecca had taken her shooting position, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. 3 confirmed kills at 850 yards, delivered within a span of 17 seconds, using equipment that belonged in a hunting museum rather than a tactical operation. His federal training had included detailed study of the world's most accomplished military snipers, But none of their documented achievements matched what Rebecca Martinez had just accomplished under crisis conditions. FBI Communications Specialist Agent Rachel Kim had been monitoring federal databases. During the crisis, running background checks on all civilian personnel who had gained access to the tactical area. The information that began flooding her screens after Rebecca's successful engagement painted a picture that explained everything while revealing why none of them had understood who they were dealing with. "Captain Walsh, you need to see this." Immediately, Kim called from her workstation inside the command vehicle. "I've been running Rebecca Martinez through enhanced federal databases, and the results are extraordinary." Her voice carried the tone of someone who had discovered information that would fundamentally change how everyone understood the situation they'd just experienced. The classified files that appeared on Kim's screens required authorization codes that she'd rarely needed to access during routine investigations. Rebecca's service record existed in compartmentalized databases that were segregated from normal military personnel files, indicating involvement in operations that remained classified decades after their completion. The woman they'd treated as an incompetent amateur possessed credentials that placed her among the most accomplished snipers in American military history. "Captain." Walsh leaned over Kim's shoulder to read the security clearance-required documentation that was streaming across the monitor. What she saw made her understand why Rebecca's authorization paperwork had seemed legitimate, despite being impossible to verify through normal channels. The woman who had appeared so out of place among modern tactical professionals was a recipient of the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and the Silver Star, awarded for actions that had saved thousands of lives during operations that officially never happened. Detective Chun joined the group gathered around Kim's workstation. His earlier irritation with Rebecca's presence now transformed into professional embarrassment at how completely he'd misjudged someone whose achievements made his own career seem elementary by comparison. According to these records, Rebecca Martinez holds the record for the longest confirmed sniper kill in American military history, Kim announced. The shot was made at a distance of 2,412 yards under combat conditions in Afghanistan, using equipment that predated most of the technology we consider essential today. The classified files revealed that Rebecca had served with special operations units whose existence was acknowledged only in budget documents that required presidential authorization to access. Her training had included programs developed specifically for operations that pushed the boundaries of what human beings could accomplish with precision weapons, conducted in environments where failure meant death not just for the shooter, but for entire teams depending on their skills. FBI agent Santos found herself reading documentation that described Rebecca's role in developing the marksmanship training protocols that were still being used by military special operations units worldwide. Her techniques had been incorporated into sniper schools across multiple branches of the armed forces, improving the effectiveness of precision shooting programs that had saved countless lives during the global war on terror. These records indicate that Rebecca Martinez was instrumental in developing the ballistic calculation methods that our own tactical teams use for long-range precision shooting, Santos said quietly. The mathematical principles she was using today weren't primitive alternatives to modern technology. They were the foundational theories that modern ballistic computers are based on. The revelation that Rebecca had essentially created the doctrinal approaches that federal tactical teams considered cutting edge made their morning's dismissal of her capabilities seem not just wrong, but professionally humiliating. Agent Torres realized that they'd been condescending to someone whose expertise had established the standards they measured themselves against. Sergeant Rodriguez approached the command vehicle after confirming that all hostages had been successfully evacuated from Jefferson High School. His experience as a military-trained sniper gave him unique appreciation for what Rebecca had accomplished. and the technical aspects of her shots that had seemed impossible now made sense in the context of her classified background. "Captain, I've examined the shooting positions and confirmed the angles Rebecca used for her engagements," Rodriguez reported. "The precision required for those shots exceeded anything I've seen in 20 years of tactical operations. The fact that she accomplished them using equipment that predates modern precision rifle systems suggests capabilities that exist at the very limits of human potential." The classified documentation continued to reveal details about Rebecca's background that explained not just her shooting abilities, but her calm demeanor under pressure and her gracious response to the disrespect she'd received from law enforcement personnel. Her service record included psychological evaluations that described emotional resilience and stress management, capabilities that had been tested under conditions that would have broken most people. Agent Kim discovered additional files that documented Rebecca's role in training programs for special operations personnel who were selected for missions requiring precision shooting under impossible circumstances. Her students had included individuals whose names appeared in classified databases as national heroes, whose actions had prevented terrorist attacks and saved American lives during operations that remained secret decades later. According to these training records, Rebecca Martinez personally instructed over 300 special operations personnel in advanced marksmanship techniques, Kim announced. Her methods produced measurable improvements in accuracy and consistency that exceeded results achieved through conventional training programs. The documentation revealed that Rebecca's retirement from active duty had been followed by consulting work with military research facilities that developed the precision rifle, systems currently used by federal tactical teams. Her input had influenced everything from barrel manufacturing techniques to optical design principles that were considered state-of-the-art. Captain Walsh found herself confronting the reality that they had spent the morning treating a living legend with barely concealed contempt, questioning the qualifications of someone whose expertise had literally saved their operation when conventional approaches failed. The cognitive dissonance was almost painful as she realized how completely their assumptions about capability and appearance had blinded them to Rebecca's true qualifications. The revelation of Rebecca's background transformed not just how they understood her individual capabilities, but how they would evaluate expertise and potential in future operations. The lesson about the danger of judging competence by appearance had been delivered with surgical precision, leaving permanent impressions on every law enforcement professional who had witnessed their assumptions being shattered by someone whose excellence came disguised as suburban ordinariness. Rebecca's return to the staging area, 40 minutes after her successful engagement, came without fanfare or acknowledgement-seeking behavior that might have been expected from someone who had just accomplished the impossible under extreme pressure. She approached the command vehicle with the same quiet professionalism she'd maintained throughout the crisis, carrying her rifle in a manner that suggested routine, completion of necessary work rather than celebration of extraordinary achievement. Her demeanor remained calm and approachable, showing none of the satisfaction or vindication that would have been understandable after proving so many skeptics wrong so dramatically. Detective Chin found himself in the unprecedented position of needing to apologize to someone whose qualifications made his own seem elementary by comparison. The weight of his morning's condescension toward a Medal of Honor recipient created professional embarrassment that would follow him for years, but Rebecca's gracious response demonstrated the kind of character that distinguished truly exceptional people from merely skilled ones. "Mrs. Martinez, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond professional courtesy," Chun said formally. "My behavior this morning was completely inappropriate, and I had no right to question your presence or capabilities. Your actions today saved hundreds of lives that would have been lost if we'd been forced to rely on conventional tactical approaches." His voice carried genuine remorse mixed with newfound respect for someone whose achievements existed in realms he could barely comprehend. Rebecca's response exemplified the humility that had characterized her interactions throughout the crisis. "Detective Chen, your concerns were entirely reasonable based on the information available to you," she replied quietly. "Most civilians carrying hunting rifles don't belong in tactical environments, and your priority was protecting operational security during a life-threatening situation. Your caution was appropriate and professional." The grace with which Rebecca deflected responsibility for their misjudgment only enhanced the respect that was beginning to replace the morning skepticism among law enforcement personnel who were finally understanding what they had witnessed. Captain Walsh approached with the expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions about capability and appearance had been permanently altered by the day's events. "Mrs. Martinez, on behalf of every agency involved in this operation, I want to express our gratitude for your intervention," Walsh said formally. "Without your capabilities and willingness to act when conventional approaches failed, we would be dealing with a mass casualty situation that could have become one of the worst tragedies in law enforcement history." Rebecca's acknowledgement of Walsh's gratitude was characteristically understated, focusing attention on the successful outcome rather than her individual contribution. "Captain, the important thing is that all the hostages were safely recovered. The tactical challenges we face today were solvable with the right approach and adequate preparation time. I'm grateful we were able to find a solution that worked." FBI Agent Torres found himself seeking guidance from someone whose expertise had proven superior to federal resources and training. His experience with crisis management had taught him to learn from every situation, especially those that challenged established doctrines and revealed gaps in conventional preparation. Rebecca's methods represented knowledge that could improve federal tactical capabilities if properly understood and incorporated. "Mrs. Martinez, would you be willing to share some insights about the techniques you used today?" Torres asked respectfully. "The precision you demonstrated under crisis conditions exceeded capabilities we thought were possible with the equipment you were using. Understanding your methods could help us improve our own tactical responses to similar situations." Rebecca's willingness to share her knowledge reflected the teaching instincts that had made her such an effective instructor of special operations personnel during her military career. She spent the remainder of the afternoon working with tactical team members who had initially dismissed her capabilities, demonstrating shooting techniques that had been proven effective under conditions far more demanding than suburban crisis response. Her instruction focused on fundamental skills that transcended equipment advantages, emphasizing breathing control methods that could stabilize shots when electronic systems failed, wind reading techniques that relied on environmental observation rather than meteorological instruments, and mental preparation strategies that had been tested under conditions where lives depended on single-shot accuracy. Sergeant Rodriguez underwent a personal transformation that extended far beyond professional development as he observed Rebecca's teaching methods. Her patient explanations of ballistic principles revealed gaps in his own understanding that expensive equipment had been compensating for rather than addressing. The humility she demonstrated while correcting fundamental errors in his technique provided a model for leadership that he would carry forward throughout his career. "Mrs. Martinez, I've been shooting competitively for 15 years. But your approach to wind compensation is completely different from what I learned in sniper school," Rodriguez admitted. "The methods you're demonstrating produce more consistent results than the electronic systems I've been relying on." Rebecca's response demonstrated the kind of wisdom that came from decades of refining techniques under life-or-death conditions. "Sergeant Rodriguez, technology is a valuable tool that can enhance capabilities when it works properly," she explained. "But fundamental skills provide reliability when equipment fails or environmental conditions exceed the parameters that electronic systems were designed to handle." Agent Santos found that Rebecca's example transformed her own approach to evaluating capabilities and potential among personnel she supervised. Watching someone respond to disrespect with patience and education, rather than anger or retaliation, provided insights into leadership effectiveness that would influence her management style for years to come. The techniques Rebecca shared were documented and integrated into training programs that improved the effectiveness of tactical teams across multiple agencies. Her emphasis on equipment-independent skills proved particularly valuable for operations in environments where technological solutions might not be available or reliable, expanding the operational capabilities of personnel who had previously depended entirely on electronic assistance. Rebecca's influence extended beyond individual skill development to fundamental changes in how law enforcement agencies evaluated expertise and incorporated civilian resources during crisis situations. Her demonstration that exceptional capabilities could exist in unexpected packages became a permanent part of tactical doctrine, preventing future incidents where qualified assistance might be dismissed based on appearance or assumptions. Transformation in attitudes toward Rebecca created a teaching environment where decades of specialized knowledge could be transmitted to a new generation of tactical professionals. Her patient instruction revealed that true expertise often involved understanding principles rather than memorizing procedures, developing judgment rather than following protocols, and maintaining effectiveness across varying conditions rather than optimizing performance for specific scenarios. Rebecca's gracious response to the morning's dismissive treatment became legendary within law enforcement circles, demonstrating that the most dangerous opponents were often those who appeared least threatening, while the most valuable allies might come disguised as ordinary civilians whose extraordinary capabilities remained hidden beneath unassuming exteriors. 3 years after that legendary day at Jefferson High School, Rebecca Martinez received an invitation that brought everything full circle. The Department of Homeland Security had established the Martinez Protocol for crisis response, recognizing tactical approaches that incorporated unconventional resources and non-traditional expertise during emergency situations. Rebecca stood before an audience of 500 law enforcement professionals at the inaugural conference, her weathered Remington rifle displayed in a place of honor, beside the most advanced tactical systems in the American arsenal. The same officers who had once dismissed her outdated equipment now studied it with reverence, understanding that precision shooting transcended technological advantages when fundamental skills were mastered through decades of practice under impossible conditions. Training academies across the country had incorporated her techniques into their curricula, producing measurable improvements in accuracy and consistency that validated approaches many instructors had considered obsolete. Detective Chen, now promoted to captain and serving as a training coordinator for multi-agency tactical responses, presented the first Martinez Award to a young officer who had achieved remarkable success using improvised equipment during a rural hostage situation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The man who had once questioned Rebecca's qualifications based on her appearance was now celebrating exactly the kind of adaptability and resourcefulness she had demonstrated. This rifle taught me something that all the computers and technology in the world can't replace, Rebecca told the assembled crowd, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. It taught me that excellence isn't about having the latest equipment. It's about making the most of what you have, understanding fundamental principles that don't change with fashion, and never allowing others' assumptions to define your limitations or potential. FBI agent Torres had undergone a complete transformation in his approach to crisis management and resource utilization. His experience with Rebecca had taught him to look beyond conventional solutions when facing impossible situations, leading to innovations in federal tactical doctrine that had saved lives during subsequent incidents. He now served as the primary advocate for incorporating civilian expertise into official emergency response protocols. The Jefferson High incident had become required study material at the FBI Academy, where new agents learned about the dangers of assumption-based evaluation and the importance of recognizing excellence regardless of how it was packaged. The case study emphasized that the most effective responses often came from combining technological capabilities with human expertise that couldn't be replicated through equipment alone. Agent Santos had revolutionized her agency's approach to specialist recruitment, developing programs that identified and utilized unconventional talent that might otherwise be overlooked by traditional screening methods. Her initiatives had discovered expertise in communities that had never been considered potential sources of tactical capability, expanding the human resources available during crisis situations. Sergeant Rodriguez became known throughout law enforcement circles for his ability to identify overlooked potential among junior officers and civilian specialists. His mentorship programs helped dozens of personnel develop skills that enhanced their effectiveness while building confidence in capabilities they hadn't known they possessed. The lessons he learned from Rebecca about patience and teaching had transformed him from a technically proficient shooter into an inspirational leader. The Remington rifle that had drawn so much ridicule remained in its display case at the federal training facility, accompanied by documentation of Rebecca's service record and the techniques that rifle had made possible. The exhibit became mandatory viewing for all law enforcement personnel attending advanced tactical training, serving as a permanent reminder that capability couldn't be judged by appearance and that technological advantages meant nothing without fundamental competence. Captain Walsh had integrated Rebecca's principles into standard operating procedures that governed multi-agency responses throughout her jurisdiction. The protocol she developed ensured that expertise would be recognized and utilized regardless of its source, preventing future incidents where qualified assistance might be dismissed based on superficial assessment of credentials or equipment. Years of follow-up analysis revealed that the techniques Rebecca shared had been incorporated into tactical training programs across 43 states, improving the effectiveness of precision shooting instruction and crisis response capabilities. Her emphasis on equipment-independent skills proved particularly valuable for operations in austere environments where technological solutions were unavailable or unreliable. The story of Rebecca's intervention at Jefferson High became part of law enforcement folklore, told and retold in training environments as an example of the importance of maintaining open minds when evaluating potential resources during crisis situations. New officers learned about the necessity of looking beyond surface appearances to identify capabilities that might prove decisive when conventional approaches failed. Law enforcement agencies began actively seeking relationships with retired military specialists who possessed expertise that could supplement their tactical capabilities during complex situations. The partnerships that developed from these initiatives provided access to knowledge and skills that enhanced operational effectiveness while building community relationships that benefited both law enforcement and civilian populations. Rebecca returned to her quiet civilian life, her brief emergence into public attention, having accomplished something more valuable than any official recognition could provide. She had reminded an entire generation of law enforcement professionals that true excellence often came in unexpected packages, that respect should be earned through demonstrated capability rather than assumed based on credentials, and that the most valuable resources were often those who appeared least likely to possess extraordinary abilities. The Martinez Protocol continued to evolve as agencies discovered new applications for the principles Rebecca had demonstrated. Crisis situations that might have ended in tragedy were resolved through innovative approaches that combined traditional tactics with unconventional expertise, validating her belief that solutions existed for problems that appeared unsolvable. When viewed through narrow perspectives, the ancient Remington rifle had delivered more than 3 perfect shots that day at Jefferson High School. It had delivered a permanent lesson about humility, respect, and the importance of recognizing That excellence could emerge from the most unlikely sources when circumstances demanded the impossible. The law enforcement professionals who learned that lesson carried it forward, creating a culture that valued substance over appearance and competence over assumptions, ensuring that future Rebecca Martinez's would be recognized rather than dismissed. When their unique capabilities were needed most, 5 years after the Jefferson High incident, the impact of Rebecca Martinez's intervention had spread far beyond law enforcement, circles into unexpected corners of American society. The story had been documented in congressional hearings examining crisis response protocols, featured in military academies as an example of unconventional problem-solving, and incorporated into business school curricula that studied leadership under extreme pressure. What had begun as a single act of heroism had evolved into a fundamental shift in how institutions evaluated capability and potential. Dr. Michael Harrison, a professor of emergency management at Georgetown University, had spent 2 years studying the Jefferson High response as part of a federal grant examining crisis decision-making processes. His research revealed that the incident had influenced policy changes across 17 different federal agencies, creating new protocols for incorporating civilian expertise during emergency situations that traditional resources couldn't address effectively. The Martinez case fundamentally altered how we think about resource identification during crisis situations. Harrison explained to his graduate students during a seminar on unconventional crisis response. It demonstrated that expertise exists in forms and locations that our institutional biases prevent us from recognizing, and that technological superiority doesn't guarantee operational success when human factors become decisive. The ripple effects extended into military training programs, where Rebecca's techniques had been incorporated into special operations curricula. Master Sergeant Lisa Thompson, an instructor at Fort Bragg, had personally traveled to Rebecca's home to learn the mathematical principles underlying her ballistic calculations. The knowledge she gained was now being taught to Army Rangers and Special Forces personnel who might face situations where electronic systems failed or environmental conditions exceeded the parameters of computer-assisted shooting. Mrs. Martinez showed us that the fundamentals never become obsolete, Thompson told her advanced marksmanship students. Technology enhances capability, but it can't replace the basic skills that allow a shooter to succeed when everything else fails. Her methods work in sandstorms, electronic warfare environments, and equipment failure scenarios that would defeat purely technology-dependent approaches. The transformation had reached into corporate training programs where Rebecca's example was used to illustrate the dangers of assumption-based hiring and evaluation processes. Human resources departments studied the Jefferson High incident as a cautionary tale about overlooking talent based on superficial assessment criteria, leading to changes in recruitment strategies that identified capabilities rather than credentials. Johnson and Associates, a Fortune 500 consulting firm, had redesigned their entire hiring process after a senior partner attended a lecture about the Martinez protocol. Their new approach emphasized practical demonstrations of problem-solving ability over traditional interview techniques, resulting in the discovery of exceptional talent in candidates who had been previously overlooked by conventional screening methods. Rebecca's influence had reached international law enforcement communities through exchanges and training programs that shared American innovations in crisis response. Scotland Yard had incorporated her wind-reading techniques into their firearms training, while the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had adopted her methods for calculating shots in extreme weather conditions that challenged electronic systems. The psychological aspects of Rebecca's performance had attracted attention from sports psychology researchers who studied peak performance under pressure. Dr. Sarah Chen at Stanford University had published papers analyzing the mental preparation techniques that allowed Rebecca to maintain accuracy when the knowledge that missing could result in mass casualties would have destroyed most people's ability to function effectively. The Martinez case provides unique insights into stress management and decision-making under ultimate pressure. Shun explained during a conference on human performance optimization her ability to maintain technical precision while processing. The emotional weight of potential consequences represents psychological resilience that exists at the very limits of human capability. Educational institutions had begun incorporating the Jefferson High incident into curricula that examined leadership, judgment, and the importance of questioning assumptions about competence and authority. Harvard Business School used the case study to illustrate how organizational hierarchies could blind leaders to resources and solutions that existed outside traditional channels of expertise. The community college where Rebecca had briefly worked as a part-time instructor before the incident had established a scholarship program in her name, recognizing students who demonstrated excellence through unconventional approaches or overcame significant resource limitations to achieve remarkable results. The program had identified and supported dozens of students whose potential might have been overlooked by traditional academic evaluation methods. Local law enforcement agencies across the country had developed citizen specialist programs that identified and maintained relationships with retired military personnel, skilled craftsmen, and subject matter experts who could provide capabilities during emergency situations that exceeded normal departmental resources. These programs had proven effective during natural disasters, technical emergencies, and crisis situations that required expertise unavailable through conventional channels. The firearms industry had been influenced by renewed interest in fundamental shooting skills that didn't depend on electronic assistance. Several manufacturers had developed Heritage Series rifles that incorporated modern materials and manufacturing precision with traditional designs that emphasize reliability and user skill over technological complexity. These weapons were marketed to law enforcement agencies that wanted backup capabilities that would function when electronic systems failed. Rebecca's story had been adapted into training films, documentary productions, and educational materials that reached audiences far beyond law enforcement and military communities. The fundamental lessons about recognizing excellence, questioning assumptions, and maintaining open minds when evaluating potential had resonated with people facing their own challenges with institutional bias and superficial assessment. International crisis response organizations had adopted variations of the Martinez protocol for incorporating local expertise during humanitarian operations in regions where traditional Western approaches proved inadequate for cultural or logistical reasons. The principle of recognizing and utilizing indigenous knowledge had improved the effectiveness of relief efforts while building relationships that enhanced long-term stability. The academic study of the Jefferson High incident had revealed broader patterns about how expertise developed outside institutional frameworks, leading to research programs that examined traditional knowledge systems, apprenticeship learning, and skill development that occurred through practical application rather than formal education. These studies had implications for everything from vocational training to international development programs. Rebecca Martinez had returned to her quiet civilian life, largely unaware of the global impact her actions had generated. She continued to practice her marksmanship skills at a local range, maintaining proficiency not for recognition or career advancement, but because excellence required constant cultivation, regardless of whether anyone was watching. Her example had taught the world that true capability often existed in the most unexpected places, waiting to emerge when circumstances demanded the impossible from ordinary people who possessed extraordinary skills hidden beneath unremarkable appearances. 10 years after the shot that saved Jefferson High School, Rebecca Martinez sat on her back porch watching her granddaughter practice shooting at tin cans with a .22 rifle that had belonged to Rebecca's father. The young girl, Emma, displayed the same methodical precision that had characterized Rebecca's approach to marksmanship, carefully adjusting her sight picture and controlling her breathing with techniques that had been passed down through 3 generations of quiet excellence. The world had changed dramatically since that October morning when Rebecca's intervention prevented a massacre that could have claimed hundreds of lives. The Martinez Protocol had become standard doctrine across law enforcement agencies worldwide. Her shooting techniques were taught in military academies on 6 continents, and her example had influenced everything from corporate hiring practices to international crisis response procedures. Emma lowered her rifle after achieving another perfect grouping and turned to her grandmother with the kind of curiosity that only children possessed. "Grandma Rebecca, why didn't you ever tell anyone you were famous before that day at the school?" she asked, her voice carrying genuine puzzlement about how someone could possess such extraordinary capabilities without seeking recognition or acknowledgement. Rebecca smiled at the question that cut to the heart of everything she believed about capability, service, and the difference between doing important work and seeking credit for accomplishments. "Excellence isn't about being famous, sweetheart," she replied gently. "It's about being ready when people need you, regardless of whether anyone knows you're capable of helping them." The lesson resonated with Emma in ways that formal education couldn't achieve, teaching her that true strength often came disguised as ordinary competence, that the most important contributions frequently occurred without fanfare or recognition, and that capability should be developed for its own sake rather than for the approval or admiration of others. Inside Rebecca's house, the walls displayed photographs from her military service, alongside pictures of the hundreds of law enforcement officers she had trained over the years since Jefferson High. The images told the story of lives touched and capabilities enhanced through patient instruction and generous sharing of knowledge that had been earned through decades of service in places where failure meant death. A letter from the President of the United States lay on Rebecca's kitchen table, inviting her to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom in recognition of her contributions to public safety and crisis response innovation. The invitation would go unanswered, as had dozens of similar honors offered over the years, because Rebecca believed that true service didn't require validation from external authorities. The elementary school where Emma attended had incorporated marksmanship, safety, and precision thinking into their curricula, teaching children to approach problems with the same methodical precision that Rebecca brought to everything she attempted. The program had produced measurable improvements in academic performance and critical thinking skills, demonstrating that the principles underlying exceptional marksmanship applied to intellectual challenges as well. Dr. Harrison's longitudinal study of the Jefferson High incident had revealed that the law enforcement officers who witnessed Rebecca's intervention had experienced permanent changes in their approach to leadership, crisis management, and personnel evaluation. Their careers had been enhanced by increased ability to recognize and utilize unconventional resources, leading to promotions and successful resolution of complex situations that might have ended differently without the lessons they learned. The Remington rifle that made history remained in its display case at the federal training facility, but identical weapons were now manufactured by a company that Rebecca had quietly consulted with to ensure that future generations would have access to reliable precision instruments that could function without electronic assistance. The rifles were used by special operations units operating in environments where technology failed and fundamental skills determined survival. Rebecca's influence extended beyond tactical applications into broader questions about how society identified and cultivated excellence. Educational researchers had documented the Martinez effect, the phenomenon where individuals performed at levels far exceeding expectations when their capabilities were recognized and properly channeled rather than dismissed based on superficial assessment. The story had been translated into dozens of languages and adapted for cultural context worldwide, always maintaining the core message that extraordinary capability could exist in unexpected forms and that assumptions about competence-based on appearance or credentials could blind observers to resources that might prove decisive when conventional approaches failed. Emma's shooting session ended with the kind of precision that suggested natural talent enhanced by proper instruction and patient practice. As she carefully cleaned her rifle using techniques that Rebecca had taught her, the continuity of excellence across generations became apparent. The skills, values, and approaches that had saved hundreds of lives would continue into the future through quiet transmission of knowledge that valued substance over recognition. The sun set over Rebecca's quiet neighborhood, illuminating a landscape where heroes lived unrecognized among ordinary people whose extraordinary capabilities remained hidden until circumstances demanded the impossible. Her legacy would endure not through monuments or official recognition, but through the countless individuals who had learned that true excellence required no audience except the satisfaction of work done properly when it mattered most. What did you think of Rebecca's incredible story of hidden strength and life-saving heroism? Have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance or background, only to prove the doubters wrong when it really counted? Share your experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you've overcome assumptions and demonstrated that true capability often comes in unexpected packages. If you enjoyed this amazing tale of an ordinary woman who accomplished the extraordinary when lives hung in the balance, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss our inspiring stories of everyday heroes who changed the world through quiet excellence. What incredible story of hidden heroism should we tell next? Let us know in the comments.